Hi folks, let's take a moment to appreciate just how far detached from reality the American left has drifted. Somewhere between fantasyland and full-blown delusion. We're living in a time where facts are optional, feelings are sacred, and saying something dumb with confidence gets you applause on daytime television. The same people who couldn't define a woman last year are now trying to define democracy for the rest of us. And speaking of brain fog wrapped in a pantsuit, today we dive into the latest unhinged meltdown featuring Rosie O'Donnell, who seems to think Kamala Harris was out here selling out stadiums like she's a political Taylor Swift. Spoiler alert, the only thing Kamala's been filling is the cringe quota. So buckle up because we're peeling back the layers of liberal lunacy and exposing the contradictions, projection, and outright comedy of the modern Democrat hive mind.
You know, a lot of people did vote for him.
Yes.
Do you accept their right to do that and their opinion of him?
Well, I respect their right to do that. I question why the first time in American history a president has won every swing state and is also best friends, and his largest donor was a man who owns and runs the internet.
Oh.
So I would hope that that would be investigated. And that we would see whether or not it was an anomaly or something else that happened on election night in America when Kamala Harris was filling up stadiums with people who supported her. And Donald Trump was not able to do that. So it's curious to me. And as an American and a believer in democracy, I would hope that we would be able to look at all of the reasons why this happened in our country.
Oh, this is bittersweet. Rosie O'Donnell's been in Ireland for just about a week, and maybe the Guinness is stronger over there, or maybe she just hasn't had an honest conversation with anybody in years. But let's break this down, because what we're witnessing isn't just confusion. It's a masterclass in projection, misinformation, and boomer-level Facebook conspiracy logic wrapped in a Hallmark card about democracy. First, this idea that Kamala Harris was filling up stadiums is so wildly detached from reality, I'm half convinced Rosie meant someone else. During Kamala's 2020 presidential campaign, she couldn't fill a Starbucks. She dropped out before the Iowa caucus, polling in single digits after getting absolutely bodied by Tulsi Gabbard in one debate and losing momentum faster than a Biden sentence. Her campaign was a flop, plain and simple. Fast forward to the 2024 presidential campaign, where Kamala Harris actually was a Democrat nominee, and she still couldn't generate organic enthusiasm to save her political life. Her campaign leaned heavily on celebrity endorsements and gimmicks, often booking major music artists to draw crowds and make her rallies look packed. But even that backfired. There were multiple reports of people leaving the venues as soon as the performances ended, completely skipping Kamala's speech like it was the opening act nobody asked for. Adding insult to injury, there were even reports that her team was bussing in people from across different states, especially in places like Georgia, to inflate attendance numbers. Now, I don't think I have to explain to any of you that that's not popular momentum. That's a campaign on life support, dressing itself up for social media optics. The stadiums weren't full for Kamala. They were full for the free concert. Now let's talk about swing states. Rosie claims it's suspicious that Trump won all of them in 2024, as if that's some kind of impossible feat. But here's a wild idea. Maybe Americans are just tired of skyrocketing inflation, open borders, and being lectured about pronouns by people who can't define basic biology. It's not a glitch in the system, it's a referendum. Historically, it's not unprecedented either. Reagan won 49 states in 1984. Was he best friends with a MySpace guy back then? Because I don't even think MySpace existed, but I wasn't even alive to know. Or did Reagan just resonate with voters fed up with elite incompetence? When the country's falling apart and the incumbent looks like he's been buffering mid-sentence, it's not surprising swing states swing hard. That's not a red flag, it's a wake-up call. But Democrats refuse to answer. Anyway, then comes the tech boogeyman. Rosie says his largest donor owns the internet. Rosie's clearly trying to paint Trump as some kind of puppet for Silicon Valley, which is hilarious considering big tech spent the last decade censoring him like he was Voldemort with a Wi-Fi signal. If she's referring to Elon Musk, that's even funnier. Musk didn't own the internet. He bought one platform, and not to help Trump, but to stop the government from colluding with private companies to silence dissenting views. If anything, Musk exposed how Democrats were weaponizing tech platforms against conservatives, as revealed in the Twitter files. So if Rosie's mad about influence, she might want to ask why her side was cozying up to moderators and censors while Trump was being deplatformed across the board. Her claim isn't just misleading, it's laughably backwards and completely incongruent with the truth. And then there's the kicker, calling for an investigation while pretending to be the voice of reason. Rosie's using the oldest rhetorical trick in the book, posing a leading question to cast doubt without evidence. I just think we should look into it, she says. That's not reasoned inquiry. That's a lazy smear tactic meant to create the illusion of scandal without actually providing any proof. It's the political version of saying, I'm just asking questions while lighting a match and walking away from a gas leak. But here's a real hypocrisy. This is exactly the kind of rhetoric Democrats spent years calling dangerous, un-American, and a direct threat to democracy when it came from Republicans questioning the 2020 results. They didn't just disagree, they weaponized censorship to shut it down entirely. People were banned from social media platforms for so much as suggesting there were irregularities in 2020. Entire YouTube channels were demonetized. They even nuked an episode of a podcast Trump did with the Nelk Boys, an interview, not an insurrection manual, simply because Trump dared to say the election might not have been on the level. That's where we were at that time. A former president censored for expressing his opinion. So now all of a sudden we're supposed to believe Rosie's gentle musings about swing states and internet billionaires are totally fine? That she's just a concerned citizen asking for transparency? Please. If a conservative said half of what she just implied 4 years ago, it would be labeled election denial, slapped with a fact check, and buried in the algorithm. The double standard isn't subtle, it's the whole show. Democracy dies in darkness, they say, right before they hit the kill switch on anything that doesn't toe the party line. And let's not forget the sheer irony here. Rosie O'Donnell, the same woman who swore Trump was the death of America, ran off to Ireland during his presidency, and now she's suddenly a patriotic watchdog calling for transparency? Sorry. You don't get to opt out of the country for 4 years and come back like you're Paul Revere and Spanx. This is classic leftist hysteria. Emotional appeals, bad memory, a sprinkle of paranoia, and zero substance. Rosie's not asking for answers. She's asking to feel better about an election outcome she didn't like. And that's not democracy. That's just delusion. And speaking of delusion, here we have one of the most embarrassing shows on television featuring a bunch of former Daily Show hosts. And this actually happened on TV right here, what we're about to watch. So brace yourselves, the cringe is strong.
What is Elon Musk doing to make this whole constitutional crisis more efficient?
Ketamine.
Here's CNN Caitlin Collins on what Elon has been up to.
The New York Times is reporting tonight that Elon Musk is now donating the maximum that is allowed by law to the campaigns of all of these Republican members that you see here on screen of Congress who have expressed support for judicial impeachments.
Good.
When do we riot? When do we?
I know what, well, here's what I've been doing. I've been going around to random Tesla dealers and just lighting cars on fire.
Say that.
I just realized there's a good chance I'll get arrested for saying that I was lighting cars on fire at Tesla dealership.
Welcome.
I didn't do that. And I wouldn't do that.
We come back to the next
segment and there's an empty chair right there.
Ah, yes. Another day, another unhinged meltdown masquerading as political commentary. This time it's CNN's Have I Got News For You panel auditioning for a role in Joker 2, complete with nervous laughter, cheap shots, and veiled calls for violence, all wrapped in the smug self-righteousness of elite media personalities who think arson is edgy if directed at the right target. Now let's start with the central premise. Elon Musk donates to Republican candidates who support judicial impeachment, and the immediate response from the panel is, when do we riot? That wasn't satire. That wasn't clever. That was a panel of mainstream media figures openly joking about political violence, followed by a dead serious fake confession about committing arson. That joke about lighting Tesla cars on fire, it wasn't just a punchline. It was a preview of the left's default coping mechanism when they don't get their way. Burn it, blame it, and pretend it was justice. And don't let the forced laughter fool you. This is classic rhetorical laundering. They float an extremist suggestion, laugh nervously to soften the blow, then retract it just enough to maintain plausible deniability. It's the same cowardly tactic used by unstable Twitter activists who say something like, I'm not saying we should burn things down, but I'd understand if someone did. You know, very similar to how Hamas Piker issues his threats in Minecraft, right? They want the dopamine of revolution cosplay without the inconvenience of personal accountability. Now let's talk about the sheer irony of this segment airing on CNN, a network that spent the better part of the last decade lecturing the country about the dangers of political extremism and violent rhetoric. These are the same people who claimed Trump's mean tweets were incitement to insurrection. The same network that clutched its pearls over January 6th, branding every MAGA grandpa in camo as a threat to democracy. But apparently, when the outrage comes from the left, it's just comedy. We were kidding. It was satire. Sure. And Antifa was just engaging in performance art with Molotov cocktails. This entire exchange is also a perfect example of projection. The left accuses conservatives of wanting to destroy democracy while casually fantasizing about rioting when billionaires fund candidates they don't like. Here's a thought. Maybe the real threat to democracy isn't the guy writing campaign checks, it's the side openly discussing when it's time to start fires over political donations they disagree with. Musk giving money to legal political campaigns is not a crisis. Burning down car dealerships because you don't like his politics, that is. And the cherry on top is the attempt at retroactive backpedaling. Michael Ian Black says, I didn't actually light the cars on fire, I just said I did. Ah yes, the old "it's a bit" defense, rolled out after realizing you might have just confessed to a felony on national television. Now, I don't think Michael Ian Black actually did any of that, but it does reek of insincerity because the point wasn't to be funny. It was to create a cathartic release for viewers who are frothing at the mouth over the idea of Republicans gaining ground. It's what happens when political commentary is reduced to emotionally stunted theater, where the applause lines are violence and the punchlines are property damage. So no, this wasn't satire. This was resentment and drag, violence wrapped in irony, and extremism dressed up as edgy humor. And the fact that this aired on a major media outlet without pushback tells you everything you need to know about who's really normalizing political violence in America. And who could have guessed that it's the side that keeps pointing their finger and calling everything, even not addressing someone by their pronouns, as violence? You see, when the left jokes about riots, it's just comedy. When the right questions election results, it's domestic terrorism. The double standard is loud, proud, and getting worse. And speaking of retards, next up we have Tim Walz. And he's apparently walking back his jokes about loving how much Tesla stock is tanking.
This guy bugs me in a way that is probably unhealthy, and but I have to be careful about being a smartass. I was making a joke. These people have no sense of humor. They are the most literal people. But my point was they're all mad, and I said something I didn't probably shouldn't have about a company. He is agreed. So I make the case, they're all butthurt about the Tesla thing, but they don't care the disrespect they have shown to employees at the Minneapolis VA who care for our veterans, and they fire them. They don't care. So we will have the conversation about efficiency in government and about doing that. But none of us believe for a second they're thinking about this. Oh, we fired everybody that's dealing with Ebola. And then he went into the Oval Office wearing a hat. I don't ever want to hear anybody talk about decorum and respect or that. Wearing a hat, coming in there, richest man in the world. Again, this maybe is just me. If I'm the richest man in the world, I'm like out on the streets handing out the money. It'd be fun as hell just to help people out.
Well, here we go again. Another Democrat gets caught saying something stupid, tries to spin it as a joke, then blames everyone else for not finding it funny. Minnesota Governor Tampon Tim Walz, ladies and gentlemen, a man so confused by cause and effect, he thinks he's the victim after openly celebrating the decline of Tesla stock. Meanwhile, his own state pension fund holds Tesla shares. That's not just irony, that's self-inflicted economic malpractice. Now, let's break this down because there's a lot of flailing and deflection here, pretending to be insight. Walz says Elon Musk bugs him in a way that is probably unhealthy. That's not an argument. That's a confession. You're admitting personal vendetta has overridden your judgment. And that tracks because only someone operating from emotional impulse rather than reason would gleefully cheer on the tanking of an American company that employs 140,000 people globally simply because you don't like the CEO's politics. Then comes the classic fallback. I was making a joke. These people have no sense of humor. Translation: I said something idiotic, and now I'm scrambling to pretend it was satire. Sorry, but You don't get to casually cheer on financial losses that impact American workers, pensioners, and your own constituents, then retreat into just kidding mode when the backlash hits. It's not humor, it's cowardice with a laugh track. And let's be clear, the only reason Walz is walking this back is because he got caught with his hand in the pension jar. According to public records, the Minnesota State Board of Investment holds Tesla stock as part of its diversified portfolio. So when he roots for Tesla to crash and burn, he's not just taking a swipe at Elon Musk, he's actively hoping to sabotage the retirement savings of teachers, state employees, and veterans. Brilliant governance, really. Who needs enemies with leaders like Tim Walz? But wait, because it gets better. Walz tries to pivot away from his blunder by saying, they're all butthurt about Tesla, but they don't care about the VA employees being fired. Classic bait and switch. It's the rhetorical equivalent of tripping over your own shoelaces and then blaming the sidewalk. One doesn't excuse the other, Tim. You don't get to torch a company's reputation and then point fingers at unrelated bureaucracy as if it justifies your reckless commentary. If you're concerned about the VA, legislate on that. Don't pretend that your shot at Tesla was some noble protest cloaked in economic justice, because it wasn't. And then just when you think the tangent has reached peak absurdity, Walz somehow connects Elon Musk wearing a hat in the Oval Office to a national discussion about decorum. I'm sorry, did I miss the part where headwear became a constitutional issue? This is the same party that invited TikTok influencers into the White House to talk about foreign policy. And we're suddenly clutching pearls over a baseball cap? Give us a break. If your biggest gripe with the richest man in the world is his hat, maybe your priorities are more out of alignment than the federal budget. And finally, Tim's cherry on top. He says, if I were the richest man in the world, I'd be out handing out money in the streets. Sure, Tim, because nothing says sound economic policy like Oprah-style handouts on the corner. This is the difference between people who create value and those who redistribute talking points. Musk is out here building companies, creating jobs, launching rockets, and advancing energy infrastructure. Walz is throwing tantrums because the guy wore a hat and doesn't donate his billions like candy on Halloween. At the end of the day, this isn't about decorum. It's about Democrats being so allergic to dissenting thought that they'd rather see companies fail and workers suffer than tolerate someone who doesn't toe the progressive line. Tim Walz wasn't joking. He got caught being exactly who he is, Tampon Tim. The joke is thinking we're too dumb to notice. And speaking of dumb, let's check in on Whoopi Goldberg and see what kind of dumb stuff she's yapping about on The View.
So let me just remind you about the Biden economy, okay? The economy added 16.6 million jobs and gross domestic product grew 12.6. They are the only administration in history to have created jobs every single month. Yes. They achieved... But wait, there's more. They achieved the lowest average unemployment in 50 years. Yeah. Wealth adjusted for inflation rose a record 37% for the median American household. And Americans filed a record 21 million new small business applications, the most in any presidential administration. You came in to a very robust, there were issues, there's always going to be issues, but you can't blame all what's happening on him. No. So how long do you think people are going to, and not just people, but even Republicans?
And not just people, but even Republicans.
What do you think? No, I didn't.
They are people.
I didn't mean it like that.
The Biden economy, also known as the fever dream Whoopi Goldberg just tried to sell you on national television with the intensity of someone reading from a hostage script written by the DNC. Let's walk through this meltdown masquerading as economic analysis, because the only thing more inflated than Biden's job numbers is Whoopi's sense of how reality works. First off, the 16.6 million jobs figure she rattles off like it's some divine economic miracle. That's not job creation, that's job restoration. The Biden administration didn't build a booming economy from scratch. They were coasting off the rebound from lockdown-induced collapse. Most of those jobs were people simply going back to work after Democrat-run states shut down businesses, schools, and entire industries in the name of science, only to reverse course when it became politically inconvenient. It's like burning down a building building and then bragging about rebuilding the foundation. And then there's the GDP claim, 12.6% growth. Sounds amazing until you realize that figure includes a post-pandemic snapback that any warm body in office would have inherited. Even with that rebound, growth has been anemic compared to where it should have been. Inflation wiped out any gains in real purchasing power, and American families know it. Ask anyone at the grocery store, a gas pump, or, God forbid, trying to buy a home in Biden's America, and they would tell you exactly what that growth looked like. Next up, the unemployment rate. Whoopi parsed the line that it's the lowest average unemployment in 50 years. Let's unpack that. Yes, unemployment numbers look low on paper, but those numbers conveniently exclude people who've left the workforce entirely. Labor force participation still hasn't recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Millions of working-age adults have checked out, and not by choice. So if you cook the books by removing the unemployed from the equation, you can make any number look good. That's not economic strength. It's statistical manipulation. Then comes the wealth claim. Median household wealth rose 37% adjusted for inflation. That's a cute line, but once again, it distorts reality. The real spike in household net worth happened during Trump's first term due to tax cuts, deregulation, and a surging stock market. What Biden presided over was a temporary inflation-driven bump, much of which was eaten by the skyrocketing cost of living. Try telling middle-class Americans that they're wealthier while they're drowning in credit card debt, paying double for eggs, and who are forced to watch their 401ks get nuked every time the Fed had to scramble to undo Biden's spending spree. And then we get the cherry on top, 21 million small business applications, which sounds like America is having a startup renaissance, until you realize that many of those were gig economy filings, one-person LLCs, or desperate side hustles because people couldn't survive on their wages. The small business boom is largely people trying to become self-employed to escape a system that's failing them. It's not innovation, it's economic triage. And let's not forget Whoopi's little verbal fumble near the end, where she accidentally distinguishes Republicans from people and then immediately panics like she just let the cat out of the bag. Because that's what this entire segment was, mask-on propaganda that fell apart the moment she had to think on her feet. The meltdown wasn't just emotional, it was ideological. When reality doesn't match the narrative, people like Whoopi double down, raise their voice, and hope you don't notice the contradiction between the stats on screen and the world you're actually living in. The Biden economy wasn't a success story. It's a Potemkin village built on manipulated metrics, dishonest framing, and a media class desperate to convince you your struggles are imaginary. If the economy was so great, why were Americans working 2 jobs to pay rent? Why were young families priced out of the housing market? Why were small businesses still closing while mega corporations thrived? Why did Trump win with such a mandate? Because behind the talking points, the Biden economy wasn't lifting people up. It was gaslighting them into submission. So Whoopi's rant wasn't an argument. It was a temper tantrum with a teleprompter to serve the sole purpose of feeding you propaganda so that you feel more comfortable looking at Biden's administration with beer goggles. Ask yourself this: who benefits when you're told everything's fine while your wallet says otherwise? When elite mouthpieces on national television shout over your lived reality and dress it up as progress, are they informing you or managing your perception? It's easy to laugh off the absurdity of somebody like Whoopi Goldberg unraveling on air, but behind the meltdown is a machine that banks on your complacency. They don't want you to question the numbers, the contradictions, or the sudden redefinition of what success looks like. But if this is what winning feels like, maybe it's time to redefine the scoreboard. Don't just take their word for it. Watch what they try to silence, ridicule, or spin. That's usually where the truth starts to show. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.